Today, we're diving into one of the strangest, most mysterious parts of the Bible, the beings that exist beyond our world. We're talking fiery six-winged Seraphim, towering Nephilim, fallen watchers, the monstrous Leviathan, and even the two prophets who rise from the dead. Who are they? What do they do? And why are they in the Bible? Some of them serve God, others rebelled against him, and all of them leave us with more questions than answers. So buckle up, because this is going to blow your mind. Let's get into it. Number 1, the 24 elders in the Bible. Who are these mystery VIPs? All right, imagine this. You're deep into the book of Revelation, already struggling to process the crazy apocalyptic imagery. Dragons, angels, beasts, when out of nowhere 24 elders show up, just sitting on thrones, wearing crowns, and worshiping God non-stop. Who are these guys? Seriously, no names, no backstory, just 24 VIPs chilling in heaven. And naturally, for centuries, people have been trying to figure out who they are and what they're doing there. Theory number 1, the ultimate biblical dream team. One popular theory, they represent the 12 tribes of Israel, Old Testament believers, plus the 12 apostles, New Testament believers. Sounds nice and symmetrical, right? Like a hall of fame that spans all biblical history. But there's a snag. Revelation was written while some apostles were still alive. So, were they already up there? Or is this a future vision of when they all arrive? Theory number 2, angelic worship leaders. Another idea, they're not even human. Some scholars believe they're high-ranking angels, possibly mirroring the 24 priestly divisions in the Jewish temple. If heaven follows a similar pattern, maybe these elders are the heavenly equivalent of priests, leading worship, throwing down crowns, and making sure God gets all the glory. Theory number 3, they represent all believers. Maybe they're not actual people at all, but symbols of God's people throughout history. White robes, a sign of righteousness, crowns, rewards for faithfulness, thrones, sharing in God's reign. It's less about who they are individually, and more about what they represent, all of God's faithful people standing before him. Theory number 4, a heavenly council? Maybe they're God's ruling council, like ancient kings who had advisors around them. If that's true, they could have a bigger role than just worshiping. Maybe they help govern heaven, oversee judgment, or carry out divine orders. Thrones and crowns usually symbolize authority, so that theory kind of makes sense. So, what do we know for sure? Honestly, not much. But here's what's crystal clear. They are very close to God. They sit around his throne. They have authority. They're not just floating around for decoration. They are worshipers, falling down, tossing crowns, declaring God's greatness. Whatever their exact role is, one thing's for sure, they're important. They pop up throughout Revelation, witness major events, and even speak at key moments. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll actually find out who they are. Number 2, the Nephilim. All right, let's get into one of the wildest mysteries in the Bible, the Nephilim. If you've never heard of them, you're in for a ride. If you have heard of them, then you already know the conspiracy-level craziness that surrounds these guys. The Genesis bombshell. They first pop up in Genesis 6, 1-4, and let me tell you, this passage comes out of nowhere. The sons of God saw human women, married them, and had kids. Their children? The Nephilim, heroes of old, men of renown. But who were they? This raises way more questions than answers. Were the sons of God angels? If so, did they literally have kids with humans? And if the Nephilim were heroes, why does the story end with God flooding the earth right after? Something big must have gone down. Theory number 1, angel-human hybrids. The most popular and most sci-fi theory is that fallen angels, called Watchers in the Book of Enoch, took human wives and created supernatural hybrids. Yep, just like demigods in mythology. And not only that, but these Watchers supposedly taught humans forbidden knowledge, magic, war, astrology, things they weren't supposed to know. And the result? The Nephilim were massive, powerful, and corrupt. So much so that God wiped them out with the flood. Wild, right? Theory number 2, just really powerful humans? Some scholars say, hold up, let's not get too crazy. What if sons of God just meant the godly line of Seth, Adam's good son, and the daughters of men were from Cain's wicked bloodline? Maybe the Nephilim were just mighty warriors, not literal giants. But here's the issue. Nephilim seems to mean something more than just strong guys. The word has been linked to fallen or cast down, implying something unnatural. Wait, did they survive the flood? Genesis 6 says the Nephilim were around before the flood. But then in Numbers 13:33, they randomly show up again when the Israelites spy on Canaan. The spies freak out and say, "We saw the Nephilim there. We looked like grasshoppers compared to them." So, did they somehow survive? Maybe more fallen angels showed up later and made more Nephilim. Maybe the spies were exaggerating out of fear. Or maybe, just maybe, some Nephilim bloodlines survived. Were they literal giants? A lot of people think yes. The Nephilim are often linked to giants, and the Hebrew root word nephal means fallen, which could suggest something unnatural. And remember Goliath, the massive warrior David fought? Some think he was part Nephilim too. Are they still around today? This is where it gets extra weird. Some believe the Nephilim never truly died out, that remnants of their DNA still exist today. There are even theories about giant skeletons supposedly found throughout history, though most mainstream scholars dismiss those as hoaxes. But whether you think they were giant warriors, angelic hybrids, or just legends, one thing's for sure. The Nephilim are one of the most mysterious figures in the Bible, and honestly, we might never get a full answer. Number 3, the 4 living creatures. All right, let's talk about some of the wildest, most mind-bending creatures in the Bible. The 4 living creatures. If you thought the Nephilim were weird, these guys take it to another level. Imagine multiple faces, wings, wheels covered in eyes, and non-stop praise so powerful it shakes heaven itself. So, what are they? Ezekiel's mind-blowing vision. The first time we see these creatures is in Ezekiel 1. And let's just say, Ezekiel was not ready. He's standing by a river, when suddenly, boom, heaven opens up, and he sees 4 creatures, each with 4 faces, a lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle. 4 wings, 2 covering their bodies, 2 stretched out, glowing like burning bronze, moving in all directions without turning. Oh, and there are floating wheels next to them, completely covered in eyes. At this point, Ezekiel is probably wondering if he's dreaming. And honestly, same. But here's the thing, this isn't just a one-time fever dream. These creatures show up again in Revelation 4, surrounding God's throne, constantly praising him, saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." So clearly, these guys are a big deal. But what do they mean? Theory number 1, they represent Jesus. One idea is that each of the 4 faces represents an aspect of Jesus. Lion equals Jesus as king, power and authority. Ox, Jesus as servant, sacrifice and strength. Man equals Jesus as human, God in flesh. Eagle equals Jesus as divine, majestic and eternal. And here's where it gets even crazier. These match up with the 4 Gospels. Matthew presents Jesus as king, lion. Mark presents Jesus as a servant, ox. Luke presents Jesus as fully human, man. John presents Jesus as fully divine, eagle. Coincidence? Maybe. But that's a lot of connections for it to be random. Theory number 2, they represent all creation. Another take? These creatures symbolize all of creation worshiping God. The lion equals wild animals. The ox, domesticated animals. The man equals humanity. The eagle equals birds of the air. Basically, everything God created is constantly praising him. Not just people, but all life in the universe. Theory number 3, they're elite angels. The most straightforward theory? These aren't symbols at all. They're high-ranking angelic beings, possibly cherubim or seraphim. They don't turn when they move. They exist right next to God's throne, and their only job seems to be worshiping him non-stop. And those weird wheels? Yeah, Ezekiel describes each creature having a wheel covered in eyes, moving wherever the spirit moves, which honestly sounds terrifying. So what are they? Are they symbols of Jesus? A representation of all creation? A unique class of angels? Whatever they are, they prove one thing: heaven is way beyond what we can imagine. It's not some boring place with harps and clouds. It's a realm of incomprehensible beauty, power, and mystery. And if this is what God's throne room looks like, yeah, I don't know about you, but I really want to see it someday. Number 4. Melchizedek, the mystery priest king. All right, let's talk about one of the most shadowy, unexplained, and downright confusing figures in the entire Bible, Melchizedek. If you're thinking, wait, who? I don't blame you. He only appears 3 times in the Bible. Yet somehow he's linked to Jesus, Abraham, the priesthood, and an eternal kingdom. So, who was he? Let's break it down. Melchizedek's surprise cameo in Genesis. The first time this mystery man shows up is in Genesis 14. Abraham, technically still Abram at this point, has just won a battle and is heading home when, out of nowhere, boom, Melchizedek appears. He's introduced as the king of Salem, which might be ancient Jerusalem. He brings bread and wine, which interesting choice. He blesses Abraham and calls God El Elyon, Most High God. Abraham gives him 1/10 of everything he owns, the first tithe ever recorded. And then Melchizedek vanishes. No backstory, no details. He just pops in, does something huge, and disappears. So, who was he? The Bible gives 0 info on his parents, birth, or death. Super weird, considering genealogies were a big deal in the Old Testament. In fact, Hebrews 7:3 goes even further, saying, without father, without mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Wait, what? This dude has no beginning or end? Yeah, this is why Melchizedek is a mystery. Theory number 1, he was a real priest king. Some scholars say Melchizedek was just a historical king and priest who genuinely worshipped God. Back then, some rulers were also priests. Salem, his city, is often linked to Jerusalem. Abraham respected him enough to tithe, meaning he was legit. But if he was just a normal guy, why does Hebrews say he has no genealogy or end of life? That's not normal. Theory number 2, he was actually Jesus. Here's where it gets wild. Some people think Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. He's called the King of Righteousness and the King of Peace, which are literally titles for Jesus. He brings out bread and wine, like the Last Supper. Abraham gives him a tithe, which was only given to God or his chosen priests. Basically, this theory says Jesus stepped into history for a brief moment to bless Abraham and set up a future priesthood. And honestly, that would explain a lot. Theory number 3, he was a type of Christ. This middle ground theory says Melchizedek was a real person, but his story was designed to foreshadow Jesus. His priesthood lasts forever, like Jesus' eternal priesthood. He blesses Abraham, just like Jesus blesses all nations. His name and titles match Jesus perfectly. So, in this view, Melchizedek wasn't literally Jesus, but his story was meant to point us to him. Why does Melchizedek matter? Here's the crazy part. This random priest king keeps showing up in prophecy. Psalm 110:4 says, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." This is about the coming Messiah, aka Jesus. Hebrews 7 goes all in, explaining how Jesus is our eternal high priest, just like Melchizedek. So, was Melchizedek a real historical priest? Jesus in disguise? A symbol of Christ's priesthood? We might never know for sure. But for a guy who only appears for a few verses, he left a massive impact on biblical history. And honestly, that's what makes him so fascinating. Number 5, the angel of the Lord. All right, so let's talk about one of the most mysterious and debated figures in the Bible, the angel of the Lord. Now, I know what you're thinking. Big deal. There are tons of angels in the Bible. But here's where it gets weird. This angel isn't like the others. Sometimes he speaks as if he's God. Other times people see him and think they've seen God. And yet, he's still called an angel. Let's break this mystery down. The angel who acts like God. The first time this strange being shows up is in Genesis 16. Hagar, Sarah's servant, is running away into the wilderness. She's pregnant, alone, and desperate. Then, boom, an angel appears. But this isn't just any angel. He tells Hagar, "I will increase your descendants." Wait, isn't that something only God can do? Hagar realizes she's just had a divine encounter and calls him the God who sees me. So, is this angel God? The angel who speaks like God. Fast forward to Exodus 3. You know, the burning bush scene where Moses gets his calling. The passage starts by saying, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush." All right, makes sense so far. But then, a few verses later, the voice from the bush says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So, was it an angel speaking? Or was it God himself? Because the text starts with, "the angel of the Lord," but then switches to God speaking directly. This happens a lot in the Old Testament. Theory number 1, he's just a special angel. The most traditional view? He's just a very high-ranking angel speaking on God's behalf, like a divine spokesperson. In ancient times, messengers could speak with the full authority of the one who sent them. So maybe when the angel of the Lord speaks as God, he's just acting as a representative. Sounds reasonable, right? Except, there's a problem. In the New Testament, whenever an angel appears, people try to worship them. And what do those angels always say? "Stop! Don't worship me. Worship God." But the angel of the Lord? He never says that. People see him, react as if they've seen God, and he never corrects them. So that brings us to another theory. Theory number 2, the angel of the Lord is actually Jesus. Some scholars believe this wasn't just an angel, but actually Jesus before he was born as a man. Why? Look at the clues. He speaks as if he is God. He is worshipped and never rejects it. He disappears from Scripture after Jesus is born. Seriously, after the incarnation, he's never mentioned again. Think about it. In the Old Testament, people couldn't see God face to face and live. But Jesus, he is God, in a form that people could see. So, why is this important? Because if the angel of the Lord really was Jesus, then that means Jesus was active long before the New Testament. He was the one who stopped Abraham from sacrificing Isaac, which is an incredible foreshadowing of his own sacrifice. He was the one who spoke to Moses at the burning bush. He was guiding, rescuing, and revealing God's plan long before he was born in Bethlehem. So, was he just a high-ranking messenger? Or was he actually Jesus stepping into history before his earthly birth? Honestly, that's up to you to decide. But one thing's for sure, he wasn't just a normal angel. Number 6, Leviathan, the chaos beast of the Bible. All right, picture this. A colossal sea creature covered in impenetrable scales, breathing fire, and so terrifying that nothing on earth can take it down. Sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, right? But nope, this thing is straight from the Bible. So, was Leviathan real? A metaphor? Or something else entirely? Let's dive in. Where do we see Leviathan in the Bible? This beast shows up multiple times in Scripture, and each time, it just gets wilder. 1 Job 41, the ultimate monster manual entry. The most detailed description of Leviathan comes straight from God himself in Job 41. God basically says, "Job, you think you're tough? Try messing with Leviathan." And then he drops this description. Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Its breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from its mouth. Wait, fire breathing? No sword, spear, dart, or javelin can pierce it. It makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron. When it rises up, the mighty are terrified. So yeah, not your average fish. 2 Psalm 74:14. Leviathan gets wrecked. Here, Leviathan is described as having multiple heads, and God crushes it and feeds it to the creatures of the wilderness. Multiple heads? Defeated by God. Okay, is this thing real or symbolic? 3. Isaiah 27:1. Leviathan and the End Times. Isaiah calls Leviathan a twisting, fleeing serpent and says, "In that day, the Lord will punish Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea." At this point, Leviathan isn't just a creature. It's linked to something much bigger. So, what does this all mean? Theory number 1. Leviathan was a real animal. Some believe Leviathan was just an exaggerated description of a real sea creature. Possibly a crocodile. Scary, but fire-breathing? Whale, huge but doesn't fit the details. Mosasaur or pliosaur, ancient marine reptiles that were absolutely massive. The argument here? Ancient people saw giant sea creatures, and over time, the legend grew. But does that explain the fire-breathing part? Theory number 2. Leviathan represents chaos and evil. Many scholars believe Leviathan wasn't a literal creature, but a symbol of chaos, destruction, and everything that opposes God. In ancient Near Eastern myths, chaos dragons had to be defeated by the gods. Leviathan fits that same mold. Except in the Bible, God alone is powerful enough to defeat it. So in this view, Leviathan isn't a real creature. It's a symbol of cosmic evil and God's power over it. Which brings us to our next theory. Theory number 3. Leviathan is connected to Satan. All right, this is where things get crazy. Leviathan is described as a twisting, fleeing serpent. Sound familiar? In Genesis, the serpent tempts Eve. In Revelation, Satan is called the Great Dragon. Some believe Leviathan is a symbolic way of describing Satan himself. If that's the case, Leviathan isn't just a sea monster. It's the ultimate enemy of God. Why does Leviathan matter? Because Leviathan represents the ultimate lesson about God's power. In Job, Leviathan reminds us that humans can't even control a sea monster, let alone question God. In Psalms, Leviathan is defeated by God, proving that nothing is too powerful for him. In Isaiah, Leviathan's final destruction symbolizes God's victory over all evil. And whether Leviathan was a real beast, a mythological symbol, or a representation of Satan himself, one thing is clear: it doesn't stand a chance against God. Number 7. Behemoth, the land monster of the Bible. All right, we've talked about Leviathan, the terrifying sea monster. But did you know that the Bible also describes a massive, unstoppable beast on land? Meet Behemoth, a creature so powerful that God himself uses it as an example of something humans could never control. Where do we see Behemoth in the Bible? Behemoth only shows up once, in Job 40:15-24. But the description is so vivid and detailed that it's left people scratching their heads for centuries. Here's what God says about Behemoth when he speaks to Job. "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox." Okay, sounds like a large land animal. No big deal, right? But then the description gets intense. It has strength in its loins, power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar. Its bones are like tubes of bronze. Its limbs like rods of iron. No one can capture it. It ranks first among the works of God. Behemoth is described as a grass-eating, massive, indestructible creature that no human can control. But what is it? Let's look at the theories. Theory number 1. Behemoth was a dinosaur. Now this is where things get really interesting. Some people believe Behemoth was actually a sauropod dinosaur, one of those gigantic, long-necked plant eaters like a Brachiosaurus or Apatosaurus. Why this theory makes sense. Herbivore? Yes. Massive in size? Absolutely. Bones like bronze and iron? That sounds about right for a creature that size. Tail like a cedar tree? Finally. A creature that actually has a massive tail. If Behemoth was a dinosaur, it would explain why it was so much stronger than any other land animal and why no one could capture or tame it. The problem with this theory. According to mainstream science, dinosaurs and humans didn't live at the same time. The Bible doesn't specifically say when Job lived, so we can't prove dinosaurs were around then. Theory number 2. Behemoth is symbolic. Now some scholars think Behemoth wasn't a literal creature at all, but rather a symbol of human pride, strength, or even an evil force. Arguments for this theory. The Bible often uses symbolic creatures, like Leviathan representing chaos. The fact that Behemoth is so powerful and untamable might be a metaphor for how humans can't control everything. Since Job is about God's power, Behemoth could just be a poetic way to show God's greatness. The problem with this theory. The text describes Behemoth in detail, just like a real creature. It sounds like a physical being that actually existed. If Behemoth was purely symbolic, why compare it to real animals like an ox? And in the end, that's the real lesson of Behemoth. Whether it was a real dinosaur, a legendary beast, or a poetic symbol, it represents the ultimate power of God's creation. And if that doesn't make you feel small in the grand scheme of things, I don't know what will. Number 8. The Watchers. The fallen angels who changed everything. Alright, so this one is deeply mysterious and highly controversial. The Bible briefly mentions a group called the Watchers. And if you've never heard of them, buckle up, because their story is wild. Some say they were angels. Others say they were rebellious divine beings. And still, others believe they altered the course of human history. Where do we find the Watchers in the Bible? The book of Daniel is the only place in the Bible where the term Watchers is directly used. In Daniel 4:13, King Nebuchadnezzar describes a vision. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. And again in Daniel 4:17, the term appears. This sentence is by the decree of the Watchers, and the decision by the word of the holy ones. The Watchers in the Book of Enoch. A forbidden story? Now the Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish text that isn't part of the Bible, but it's still one of the most fascinating and debated books ever written. And guess what? It goes all in on the Watchers. According to Enoch, the Watchers were a group of 200 angels who came down to earth and messed everything up. The rebellion of the Watchers. The Watchers were supposed to observe humanity, hence the name Watchers. But instead of just watching, they decided to interfere. Led by a rebellious leader named Semyaza, they fell in love with human women and decided to take them as wives. These unions supposedly produced the Nephilim, the mysterious giants mentioned in Genesis 6. But it doesn't stop there. The Book of Enoch says the Watchers also taught humanity secret knowledge, things like weapon making, which led to war, sorcery and magic, which led to corruption, cosmic knowledge, which humans weren't supposed to have yet. Basically, the Watchers gave humanity a bunch of power, and instead of making things better, it brought chaos, violence, and destruction. God was furious. According to the story, God sent the archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael to put an end to it. The Watchers were cast into the abyss, imprisoned in darkness until the final judgment. Their leader Semyaza was bound in chains. The Nephilim were wiped out by the flood in Noah's time. So, according to Enoch, the Watchers were not just angels. They were rebellious divine beings that corrupted humanity. Were the Watchers real? Let's break down the possibilities. Theory number 1. The Watchers were just angels. Some believe the Watchers were just regular angels mentioned in Daniel. Theory number 2. The Watchers were the fallen angels of Genesis 6. This theory sees a direct connection between the Watchers and the sons of God in Genesis 6. Theory number 3. The Watchers are just a myth. Some scholars believe the Watchers were just ancient stories, not real beings. One thing is for sure. The Watchers remain one of the most chilling, debated, and mysterious groups in biblical history. And if there's even a shred of truth to their story, it means that something really dark happened long ago, and we're still feeling the effects today. Number 9. The Two Witnesses. The mysterious prophets of Revelation. All right, let's talk about one of the most dramatic, mysterious, and supernatural duos in the Bible. The two witnesses from the book of Revelation. These two show up at the end of time, preaching, performing miracles, calling down plagues, and then, after being killed, they rise from the dead in front of the entire world. Who are they? What is their mission? And why do they play such a huge role in the end times? Where do we see the two witnesses? The two witnesses appear in Revelation 11:3-12, where their story unfolds like a scene from a Hollywood blockbuster. Here's what Revelation says about them. They will prophesy for 1,260 days, about 3.5 years. They wear sackcloth, a sign of mourning and repentance. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and destroys their enemies. They have power to stop rain, turn water to blood, and strike the earth with plagues. After finishing their testimony, they will be killed by the beast. Their bodies will lie in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. The world will celebrate their deaths, giving gifts, like it's some kind of anti-Christmas. Then, suddenly, they will rise from the dead. God will call them up to heaven, and a massive earthquake will strike. This is one of the most intense and supernatural events in the Bible. These two witnesses are clearly not just normal prophets. So, who are they? Theory number 1, Moses and Elijah. Why? Because Elijah called down fire from heaven. 1 Kings 18:38. Moses turned water into blood and unleashed plagues. Exodus 7-12. Both appeared with Jesus at the Transfiguration. Matthew 17:3. Elijah never died. He was taken up to heaven. 2 Kings 2:11. Moses' body was mysteriously hidden by God. Deuteronomy 34:5-6, Jude 1:9. This makes sense because the miracles the two witnesses perform match what Moses and Elijah did in the Old Testament. Theory number 2, two future prophets yet to come. A third possibility is that the two witnesses are not Old Testament figures at all, but two brand new prophets sent by God. This would mean they are specific individuals chosen for the end times. Their powers would be similar to Moses and Elijah, but they wouldn't be the same people. They would act as God's final prophets before Christ returns. This theory makes sense because the Bible never actually names them, which might mean we don't know who they are yet. Could they be here soon? Since the two witnesses appeared during the end times, some people believe they could already be alive today, waiting for the right moment to step forward. With modern technology, their deaths and resurrection could be broadcast worldwide in real time. The way the world hates religious truth could make people celebrate their deaths. The fact that they will preach in Jerusalem means the events of Revelation could be closer than we think. So, who are they? At the end of the day, here are the possibilities. Moses and Elijah, returning to finish their mission. Two future prophets, chosen specifically for the end times. We may not know their exact identities, but one thing is certain. When the two witnesses show up, the world will never be the same. And whether they are ancient prophets returning or new messengers sent by God, they will be impossible to ignore. Number 10, the Seraphim, the fiery guardians of God's throne. All right, let's talk about one of the most mysterious, awe-inspiring, and downright otherworldly beings in the Bible, the Seraphim. Now, if you've ever imagined angels as gentle, glowing figures with harps, throw that image out the window. Because Seraphim are on a whole different level. They have 6 wings. They are constantly on fire. They shout with such power that the entire temple shakes. And most importantly, they are the closest beings to God's throne. So, who are they? What do they do? And why are they so terrifying? Let's break it down. Where do we see the Seraphim in the Bible? Unlike other angels that pop up throughout Scripture, Seraphim are only mentioned once, in Isaiah 6:1-7. In this vision, Isaiah is taken straight into the throne room of God, and what he sees completely wrecks him. Here's how he describes it. I saw the Lord seated on a high and exalted throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim, each having 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And they called out to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. What do seraphim look like? According to Isaiah, each seraph has 6 wings, 2 covering their faces, because even they can't look directly at God's glory, 2 covering their feet, a sign of humility before God, 2 used for flying, meaning they are constantly in motion, serving and worshiping, and their very name, seraphim, comes from the Hebrew word seraph, which means burning ones. So, yeah, these beings aren't just hanging out by God's throne. They are blazing with holy fire. What do seraphim do? From what we see in Isaiah 6, the seraphim's primary job is worship. They cry out, Holy, 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 declaring God's absolute perfection. Their voices shake the entire temple, showing just how powerful they are. They stand in God's immediate presence, which is something not even other angels get to do. But then, something even crazier happens. Isaiah's terrifying encounter with a seraph. As Isaiah stands there, completely overwhelmed by the scene, he suddenly realizes, I am ruined. Why? Because he is a sinful man, standing in the presence of absolute holiness. But then, one of the seraphim does something unexpected. It flies down to Isaiah, carrying a burning coal from the altar. It touches Isaiah's lips with the coal and says, See, This has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. So, not only do seraphim worship God, but they also purify those who are called into His presence. But here's the question: what exactly are they? Are seraphim angels? This is where things get tricky. We usually think of seraphim as angels, but the Bible never actually calls them that. The word angel means messenger, and angels in the Bible are usually sent to deliver messages to humans. But seraphim, they never leave God's throne. They don't deliver messages. They are exclusively focused on worship. So while seraphim are heavenly beings, they might actually be a separate category from regular angels. Are seraphim still around today? Absolutely. Since they are in God's throne room, they are likely still surrounding Him in worship, declaring His holiness, carrying out purification, just like with Isaiah. And if that's the case, it means that right now, in this very moment, seraphim are praising God in heaven, shouting so powerfully that the entire spiritual realm shakes. So, what are seraphim, really? At the end of the day, here's what we know. They are the closest beings to God's throne. They are constantly on fire with holy passion. They worship God so intensely that heaven itself shakes. They are not just angels. They are something even greater. They remind us that God's holiness is so powerful. Even sinless beings cover their faces in His presence. And whether we ever see them in this life or the next, one thing is certain: they are praising God right now, in ways we can't even imagine. Conclusion: what do these beings tell us? What do these strange, otherworldly beings tell us about God, the universe, and our place in it? Let's bring it all together. 1. God's reality is bigger than we can imagine. Look, if there's one thing all of these beings have in common, it's that they show us that reality is far greater than what we can see. The Bible isn't just about humans and the earth. It pulls back the curtain on a vast supernatural world that we barely understand. 2. God's power is unmatched. Every single one of these beings, no matter how powerful, ancient, or terrifying, has one thing in common: they all answer to God. No matter how mysterious or powerful these beings are, God alone is in control. And that means there's nothing on this earth or beyond it that He can't handle. 3. There's more to the story than we know. Let's be real. We don't have all the answers. The Bible gives us glimpses into these mysteries. But there are some things we may never fully understand until we stand before God Himself. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real lesson from all of this is that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. Because one day, when this world ends and God reveals everything, we might finally understand. So, what do you think? Which of these mysterious beings fascinated you the most? Let's talk in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more content that explores the fascinating overlap of science, history, and faith. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.